Okay, welcome everyone. It's great to have you all here for our fourth lecture of the fall semester, out of the lecture series of this year, which, as you have been sort of experiencing, it's always very diverse and very different sort of type of guests that we bring to sort of talk to you and present the work that they're doing, the research, their sort of interests, and among everything is the love for the profession and for the field. So today we have a very special guest that is coming from New York. She just landed 2 hours ago, maybe, and she is a design principal at KPF, which is a big architectural firm that has multiple offices all over the world, but she's, in this case, Hana is based in the New York office. So Hana Kaseem is, as I said, is a design principal. One of the reasons she's here also is to talk to you about the possibilities and the realities of leading in this field for women in the field of design in corporate offices, which is always challenging, but she's a great example of successful person in this area. And the work that Hana has been involved in at KPF, it's very global. It's in different countries, different sort of types of projects with different teams. Some of you who will graduate in spring next year will join big offices. And it's interesting when we see corporate offices like this, the type of clients they have, the type of commissions they have, the type of projects they handle. And it's part of a reality that the responsibilities that they get when they have to design a master plan for a city, projects based around the environment, even sort of developers kind of type of projects, it's always of huge impact. So I'm very proud and happy that Hana is here, because she's also on a different side of the practice of that office, and she's going to share with you some of the projects that they're doing, some of the projects that she's been participating with, some of the buildings that are happening in Miami or are coming to Miami, because KPF is also doing projects here. And just join me in welcoming Hana Kaseem from KPF.
Can you hear me? Yeah, great. So thank you, Henry, for this very nice presentation. I'm thrilled to be here. I want to say that it's not my first time at FIU. Some of you might know we designed the business school. Maybe 15 years ago or so, we were trying to calculate. Miami always holds a very special place for me. So for many reasons, and I'm thrilled to be here, so thank you for the invitation. So I'll begin by talking a little bit about KPF. We're a global office. I like to think of us as glocal, meaning that we work everywhere in the world, but wherever we're working in a very contextual, locally rooted manner. We have 9 offices throughout, 600 plus employees. Our biggest office, the design office, is New York with 350 people, followed by London, which is about 150. That's also another design center. The rest of the offices are smaller offices. But most importantly, we have a very international group of people coming from 40-some countries, many languages spoken throughout. So diversity is very much embedded in the DNA of KPF, not only the range and places that we work in and stakeholders that we're involved in, but also within our firm itself, the diversity that we represent. We work in a very collaborative manner. We were founded in '76, and sustainability is also something that is very much, at the top of our list of goals. And at this point in time, we're very happy to say that it's very much like baked into the design thinking. It's not something that's layered on top. And we work in many typologies. Earlier, Henry and Jason and Mary-Lise were asking what typologies I work in. Well, I kind of specialize in not specializing, and I think that's what you'll hear constantly at KPF. But we do work in a variety of scales as well that tend to be the larger scales, because that's where we're called in to lend our expertise with larger teams to be able to deliver the projects. So with that, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to improve both on the sustainability front and on the well-being and belonging front for the 99%. And I say the 99% because though we do private, luxury-oriented buildings, majority of our buildings and our work tends to be in the public realm. So that means that these are not, single homes for a couple or a family. The impact of our work and our design is touching a really great number of people, and that's throughout the world. So there's a certain responsibility that comes with that kind of impact. And I'm going to talk about this concept of belonging that has helped me really center our work, the work of the firm, and thinking about it more conceptually in what we contribute. And so belonging, in a sense, is a circular notion. It has two sides to it. One half is our impact on environments, and the other half is the impact on environments on us. So on one side, you have nature, connection to the planet, sustainability, maybe things that you might qualify as being universally human. We all connect to, we all understand, like biophilic design, connection to nature, connection to light, etc. And then on the other side, aspects that are more culturally specific, culturally driven, and that are inclusive of diversity by that very quality of them, that involve a certain narrative that's very particular to a context, to a city, to a place. And so between these two is where we're always looking for this kind of sense of belonging, where people feel an attachment to place and feel committed and engaged with it, because we think that that contributes to well-being, but ultimately it also contributes to both social well-being, personal well-being, but also contributes to sustainability, because when people are engaged with their environments, they are more likely to want to preserve them and take care of them. So that goes for buildings and landscapes, et cetera, the planet. And I want to just put forward this question, which is something that I hope that you'll, think about. As an example, theoretical example. So if you think about the color red, for example, how does the color red affect us? I'm giving you this as an example of what I'm calling the universal and then the culturally specific. So red, in a certain context, for example, when we're designing in China, it might mean something. It might have some cultural baggage associated with it, good baggage, the kind that makes you think about New Year's and the Chinese lanterns and things that are, important culturally. But then on the other hand, the same color applied in a different context, let's say we're designing in Spain, what does the red mean? What is this matador cape about? As it turns out, it's not to excite the bull, it's to cover the bloodstains because of the gory aspect of the sport. But so these are all things, and the question in my mind is always, as we are crafting and designing these buildings and making decisions about materiality and color and pattern, what are the aspects that connect all these projects at a universal level, and what are the aspects that are very culturally specific? So I'll go to another example, which is, material of concrete. It can be tailored in very different ways. It can have connotations that are about luxury and minimalism and sophistication, or it can be treated in a way or understood in a way that it connotes unfinished or derelict or, and those are exchangeable. For example, like if we presented a raw concrete wall in a certain context with a certain group of stakeholders, it might be interpreted as unfinished and perhaps poor, as opposed to what we're intending is that it's a raw material that has a certain sensuality to it. So I'll start off with a project just next door that many of you have probably walked by. These photographs, as you might be able to tell, were taken a while ago, so the colors are much brighter. But this is a project where we started looking at these questions about materiality and color very early on, the business school here. So there's a very simple wrapper of concrete that is treated in 3 different degrees of sandblasting to create texture and variety within this really quite minimal budget we were working with, and set of materials that are local, that are executed well here, which are precast concrete and stucco. And for the stucco and the color, as the deans of the school had explained to us and shared with us that this school is kind of a gateway for South America and Latin America. So a lot of the student body comes from countries where, pre-Columbian heritage was very important. And so we started off with this painting and picked off colors from it, and then developed those on the interior and exterior of the building. And you can see here the colors and the vividness of the colors and the kind of indoor-outdoor space that you can leverage in this climate were really important for us. Upcoming, that just got approved at a very different scale. This is one of my colleagues' projects here in Miami, and Tower 36. And so we're very excited about this one as well. And here, again, the inspiration is very locally driven. It's looking at, different types of palm trees. Biophilic design is very much embedded both in the facade and the access to green spaces throughout. And then another project I share very quickly is One Island Drive that also has been unveiled recently. And again, taps into this kind of inspiration from the water, the lightness, and activity around the waterfront. So going far away to China, and I'm going to show a few projects in China too, for the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and then I'm going to come back to the US and share some more work that hopefully you'll see ties back to the initial question I'm trying to put forward here to you, which is the sense of belonging in architecture. So this is an interesting project we developed through COVID. During the COVID period, it's built, it's done. This is how the site was when we first started looking at the project. There are a couple of canals that are on the site. And what's interesting about it also is that it's Hong Kong University, but it's their first campus in mainland China. So there's some cultural, political notions that have some sensitivity to them, and great ambition that the school had in terms of being very innovative, teaching in a very open way, and mostly being really pioneering in terms of sustainability. We thought of this as a living lab, so the building and the campus are basically a living experiment where everything can be monitored and creates this feedback loop for the client. So we developed the whole master plan, which includes residential areas here and here. This zone right here is the central research hub with all of these machine in the park concept, which are labs around it. And then this is the gateway entrance piece and the student center. And I'm going to be talking about these two, which I was personally involved in. Our work is very data-informed. We use data not as a way to tell us what the solution is, but to show us nuances and small modifications that could happen either in the massing of the building or its orientation to improve sustainability, or views, or efficiency. We have a group in-house that's called KPF-UI, and you can go on kpfui.com. It's an open website that's accessible to all, with a lot of tools, very interesting tools that we custom built for our clients and for certain projects that help us design in a very efficient and informed, data-informed way. So here, just as an example, the orientation of towers where we plug in for views, solar radiation, whatever we want to the parameters that we're looking to answer. And it gives you gazillion, the program that we work with gives us gazillion, many options to look at. Of course, at the end, we always come back as architects and have a certain, preference or instinct that one is going to lend better spaces than another. But it's a really good starting point. So I brought that in because this was very important in the development of the master plan for HKUST. And you might remember I mentioned this is like a living lab. So all the buildings are not only designed with this data-driven and data-informed approach, but also then monitored. And everything goes back into this room, which is called the campus brain, with a giant screen where people are working there the whole day, monitoring day-to-day, by the minute, in real time, the performance and the use of these buildings, and then being able to tweak them and fine-tune them as you go. The buildings that I want to talk about first is this University Activity Center and the entrance gateway. But the University Activity Center is really thought of as being part of a landscape building, part of the non-research focused aspect of student life. So it's about respite, it's about the break that one takes in between focus, very intense focus moments in the lab, and that ties back to well-being and restoration and biophilic design, which is very important to our practice as well. So here you have the gateway building, which is receiving you, creating this kind of arc, semi-arc, bringing you into the campus, and then the University Activity Center that connects back to the residential quad, connects and creates this kind of inner street, interior street that brings students through. So you might remember when I first started talking about this, I mentioned that this was the first campus in mainland China. The original campus is in Hong Kong, and you can see here Clearwater Bay campus with the semicircle and the sculpture in the center. And the significance of this arrival point was such that it was very important for the client. They wanted to create something that resonated back and connected back to that original campus and the symbolism behind this sundial sculpture, which is very iconic for the university and talks about a sense of science from the history of it and the legacy of science to its future. And so we wanted to do something that both recalled the original campus gesture, but really put forward a sense of dynamism, of openness, of looking forward. And so you can see that the gesture of this building is an unfinished gesture. It's open-ended, it's a lot more porous, it's a lot more open. We have balconies throughout that provide, and terraces that provide access to green spaces and invite students and faculty in and through. And all of it still centers around this sculpture, which was one of the calls that the client had for us. And this is now the same form seen from the campus side, where we've incorporated the canal that you saw in the very first slide and funneled the water through. And, it's creating a very interesting habitat for some of these black swans that I guess have been coming here. So, and then the last thing, so this is in the center of the campus, some of the terraces that you see there. And then in terms of the cultural narrative, that connects back to a sense of place in an inclusive way. We leaned into this texture of the bamboo because the bamboo plant is something that is very symbolic across many Far Eastern and Asian countries, and it symbolizes growth, it symbolizes advancement, and we felt that that was something that was, grounded the building, but also allowed it to create a sense of belonging for students that came from the entire region. It wasn't so specific to this place only. So we tapped into that and developed the texture of these panels, which I think you can see here in these elements there. So this is a very highly sustainable building. It's, we have photovoltaic cells on the roof. It's oriented in such a way and shaped in such a way that it does a lot of the shading on its own, just due to the form and the angle of the sun. And there are, of course, like ways of incorporating water management and recycling, irrigation, all of that in a very sustainably driven manner. So it's performed very well for the campus. The next building next here, so that was the entry gateway, and then now this is the student center. So this one is a lot more, less of a big civic presence and a lot more grounded, a lot more casual and connected to nature, really being a respite from this machine in the park idea of the science buildings that you see in the background. And along with its planted roof, again, still looking at the bamboo as a notion that tied across all the buildings, but here, looking at the color of the bamboo. So it's green, and so I'm going to talk about color and texture a little bit. Green is something that I think we all connect to. We feel like it's something that is universally engaging, makes reference to nature. But here it's tailored in such a way, both in its form and the pixelation of color, that it really recalls and is inspired by the bamboo plant. The building goes from ground, planted green roof, and connects all the way up to the tip, to the sky. And that interior street I was talking about earlier, you can see it here. We brought landscape notions in through the patterning of furnishings and interior plantings. And this has been a really very well used building. I still haven't been able to go there because this was just built during COVID, as I mentioned. And I'm really looking forward to it. But I hear that it's used all the time, and people really feel that it creates this kind of pause that they're looking for in their busy days. And then here again, we brought in color and channeled light through it, planted green walls, different ways of connecting indoor and outdoor and connecting to nature. And one of the most important things about it is it's highly sustainable, and it's also very difficult to achieve hybrid ventilation in this climate. This is a very hot and humid climate, and yet we were able to develop the facade of this building and the ventilation system so that in some of the more temperate months they can open up the windows and use natural buoyancy and chimney effect to ventilate some of the public spaces. So that we're very proud of. I'm going to now come back to the US and share with you, again, a master plan, but that is an infrastructural master plan that then led into very specific resiliency-driven interventions. So this is post-Sandy. Some of you might know or have heard of this big storm that hit New York. Many developments were devastated, actually. And this is for New York Housing Authority. It's a FEMA-funded project, and with 8,000 and some residents affected. And what I'm going to do is share with you this video that I think really tells the story.
It's 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot. Next thing I know, these cars are bobbing. When the water came in, thousands and thousands of gallons were just rolling down the stairs. And I even said to my sister on the phone, I said, this, we're in trouble. Everything's underwater. Cars are bobbing like apples in a pail. It doesn't seem like it's going to stop.
You know, the days after Sandy, this beautiful bright sun, and all I could see was just people feeling so struck and traumatized by what had just happened.
The initial 8 days was tough, but the 9th and 10th day it got cold because it was in October, right there. That's Richard Street. I had to help the elderly go step by step, carrying up water, food, candles, and flashlights. You live on the 10th floor and you're 70 years old. How you expect to get groceries up there?
What Superstorm Sandy and the surge that came and devastated Red Hook demonstrated for us here was that communities, neighbors, were the first responders. Federal government finally responded after a long time and passed a bill that really brought funding to public housing. That's where we figured out we needed to make sure that community was at the table, and that we needed a top designer to join us and design the next chapter of Red Hook.
We actually requested, when we started the project from NYCHA, that we would have the opportunity to speak directly with the community. That direct relationship between the architect and the people living in the community is really critical to framing our thinking, their trust, and forming a solution that's really going to be the best.
The first few community meetings were very, very tough. We had come to them with what we thought were concepts and ideas that would be welcomed. However, their main complaints had almost nothing to do with what we had identified as the main issues to solve for.
One of the things that we discovered during our community engagement process was, yes, we have to deal with Sandy, but there were a number of other issues that the site faced sort of on an everyday basis.
The Red Hook homes were both a place hit really hard by the storm and a place that is really hit hard by the legacy of public housing and what it takes to maintain it and the level of investment and also the level of neglect. You're not just talking about floodwater. You're not just talking about power outage.
We understood better which areas were dangerous areas and why they may have been dangerous. Sometimes it's something as simple as not enough lighting. What FEMA stipulates is that the funding can only be used for resiliency, repairs, and prevention. What we wanted to do was a little bit more.
Our goal was to take every dollar and use it for measures that would make the community resilient, but would also improve the quality of life in other ways for the residents.
The power plant on the east side acts as a beacon that signals the presence of Red Hook. The materials are very transparent, so they expose equipment inside of it. There's an idea about visibility, understanding. The West Power Plant faces Coffey Park. We've conceived of it as a large-scale mural which the Red Hook community would participate in creating so the residents could feel ownership of the changes in their environment.
Then across those two facilities, there will be a distribution of heat and electricity across the site, located between the buildings and located adjacent to the buildings. All of these utilities will be protected, will be raised, will be provided at the elevation that they need to be to accommodate the next Sandy and to accommodate sea level rise.
The pods act as lanterns in the way that they were lit, but they also were slightly differentiated in their color. So it's an orienting device, but it's also a way of creating a sense of identity for each courtyard.
To protect from flood, we came up with this idea of the lily pad, which is lifting the landscape and creating a zone of protection.
If the neighborhood floods again, the water will come through, but these lily pads will provide a safe haven for the residents of both sets of buildings.
We worked with the police department and we made sure that the elevations of the lily pad, can you see from your police car activity that's happening at the same time, and you can tell your kid, you stay within the courtyard. Creating that sense of ownership is definitely a safer landscape.
As people start seeing the changes, they're going to want more, and they're going to see that things can happen when we unite as a community.
So this project is well under construction. I think it's got another maybe less than a year to go. We're really happy. We're very connected with the community still and touch base regularly. So it's a long-term commitment, this project. And what we've done prior to the construction is we did a survey with a set of questions, both qualitative, quantitative, that we distributed to the residents. And we will do a post-occupancy evaluation, which will happen after the construction is done and people are settled, with their public spaces as we've designed them, to evaluate the impact of our design and the efficiency and kind of the responsiveness that we've had, and really to understand whether we were indeed able to respond to the residents' needs above and beyond what FEMA stipulates, but actually whether that community engagement process was successful and learn from it for the next project. It's a really golden opportunity because you almost never have the same group of people before a project happens and after it. So it's a really golden opportunity to understand the impact of the design on people's lives. Now, still in New York City, this has to do, again, with sense of belonging and interpretation and connection to history. This is the Farley Post Office building. It's a historic landmark building. A portion of it was renovated recently by SOM for the Moynihan train station, and also the exterior and the shell of the building was restored by SOM. When we started on the project, Meta asked us to do an evaluation to see whether this would be a good fit for them. It's 700,000 square feet. It's one of the really biggest footprints of buildings in the city. And I should mention that for decades, developers, architects have tried to repurpose and take a stab at rethinking and adaptively reusing this building. And so we're very humbled, actually, that this went through and it happened, and it's been very well received. But the building is a really interesting building. It's very important for New York City, as I mentioned. It was built in two parts, and it's landmarked, and it has many historical, beautiful details throughout. It's the size of two New York City blocks. It's at least is 400 by 800, so that's a considerable floor plate to work with. And here, the culture that I'm going to be referring to is that of Meta. Meta has a very specific way of thinking about the workplace that's really very enriching. We learned a lot from this process. But you can see here in the planning that the idea of neighborhoods that are broken up by spaces for collaboration, for socialization. The neighborhoods are all arranged around the perimeter, so you can have access to daylight. I should mention that these openings that you see outlined here and above here, those came with the building. So these were part of the shell that we were given to work with. The elements that were historical elements to preserve are this historic corridor, these elevator lobbies, and a few other details here and there that I will go through, but there you can see the Moynihan train station and the rest of the square footage that's really for Meta. So 700,000 square feet, that's like a 28, 29-story office building. The fact that we're able to avoid building from scratch and instead being able to use this available shell with all of the embodied carbon that's in it, we feel really good about putting that to use, that square footage. So here in the center of the space is an atrium that connects all of the floors together and brings you to this entry that is, you can see there that main atrium that brings you into this entry space. And it's really thought of as a very green, plant-filled space that taps into the light and signals gathering for all the floor plates along it. That's a sculpture piece. There's a big integration of art throughout the whole development. These are the historic elevator lobbies as we found them. And the historic aspect, like these finishes, were meant to be kept as is. But there was no requirement for maintaining the function of it. So we tried to merge the history of the building with the culture of Meta. And in the programming and the culture of Meta, there is calling for spaces that are library spaces, quiet spaces, and sort of like me spaces where you can just take a break and be by yourself in a very small room, even for half an hour, 45 minutes, whatever it is. So we merged those two together and transformed these elevator shafts into like reading corrals or nooks within what then became their reading library. And these spaces have been really very well beloved. You can see some of the details here that we preserved. Never really erasing the history, but just reinterpreting it and creating this kind of sense of ownership of your environment with details like this, like being able to just dim the light however way you want it to be, and create a very intimate space. And these are booked all day long. Like when we talk about the return to the office, which you're more involved in the return to studio, but return to the office is a big conversation. And most of New York City is showing like something like 48, 49% occupancy. Well, this building is well above and beyond that. It's more like in the mid-60s. So it's been very successful in drawing people to come together and connect in the workplace. And then this is the other historic mail parcel post office area that we renovated and repurposed into their visitor lobby with a lot of the blueprints from the original building. And then finally tapping into the history of the place as a mail sorting facility and this narrative of going from the snail mail to digital communication, which is what Meta is very much all about. We kind of kept that notion in play and repurposed and rethought the hollow terracotta material to create this feature wall that recalls the sorting mailroom facility. So there's a lot of parallels or tangential relationships between things that are very narratively driven, very much about a story, and elements that are very much about raw materiality and how we feel about this materiality on an individual basis. There's a lot of work with the bricks, studying the bricks and understanding the patterns. Some of the historic brick that we recoursed, and then some new brick where we also, again, did not want to erase the history. We just kind of fitted things together so they work together, but you could clearly see and understand where the new, where the old was. I'll share one more project quickly, which is In addition, as well, we're very interested in repurposing and renovating spaces because of the embodied carbon in them, but also because of the legacy and the historical narratives that these kinds of projects offer to the occupants and various stakeholders. So this was at the school, the law school in Kentucky, which looked like this. We reskinned the whole building, added a few floors up here, and a sidebar of classrooms, and tried to work in such a way that it related to this historic memorial hall that they have on campus through the colonnade of the building, of course reinterpreted in a much more modern way, but created a very centrally located spine to the building that reorganized it and brought light into it. But the narrative part that I want to touch on is this idea of like a few elements that we really anchored our design to. One was, we were very inspired by this type of furniture. This chair is called the Kentucky chair. It's a very simple chair. It's slats that are just, hinged together. And then the notion of bluegrass in Kentucky. So these were all things that we, kept talking about as unifying narratives for the school. And you can see a lot of the detailing here in the reinterpretation of the furniture, in the slats on the wall that create this feature wall in various blue tones. And remember this, because I'm going to come back to it in a much smaller scale of intervention. I'll click through these before and after images and how people start to really connect to the space with very specific detailing, like the width of a countertop, so people can very casually have spaces to have informal conversations. Faculty and students can just stop in between classes, lean in, put a cup of coffee, and have a conversation. And this is the moot courtroom as well, before and after. So, and the library, bringing in light. I'm going to finish with a couple of art installations that connect back to some of the work in a very abstract way, and I hope you'll indulge me with these. I'll talk through a few of them. This was a piece that was commissioned for Art Omai, upstate New York. And it's very inclusive in the sense that it's multisensory. It allows for the enjoyment of the piece, whether you are perhaps have a hearing impairment or maybe you don't see. There are many ways of experiencing this piece, and the concept of the piece has to do with this understanding the color and the tonality of blue. How do we relate to blue? Is blue sky always a background? Is it a foreground? And how does it connect to our understanding and our reconception of space constantly? So this piece is always reinterpreting itself, and it's really meant to be like a collective orchestration. People play it together by touching these vertical reeds. But in some light, some of the vertical elements completely blend into the sky, and so you see fewer of them. So essentially, it's always recomposing itself based on you, the individual, or you, the collective, that come together and play this piece. And so there are a number of studies that I did. This is a little bit more tangential work, more personal work, but that helps inform my design work, and you'll see how this piece in particular relates back to that Kentucky blue wall that I shared with you earlier. This is a very multidisciplinary investigation that has to do with choreography and this exact spacing of these elements, how people move through them. and very much about testing and trying out different heights, the sounds that would be created due to the height of the pipes, and looking at it in different times of day and throughout the seasons as well. And the play of shadow on the ground. So I brought this as an example of ways of investigating architectural elements, but ways of investigating them in a way where you're not so tied to program, budget, client, etc. It's much more an abstract investigation, but it helps inform your work. And this was actually an interesting photograph about figure ground and how these vertical elements frame and reframe the landscape beyond. We also worked with the dance troupe for the opening of the piece, so they activated the piece for us. I feel like I just encourage all students to really push the boundaries of multidisciplinary work, because it really helps inform wherever you end up going, what direction you take. It really helps, I think, inform it. There you can see how it translated and informed this wall in the Kentucky building. The verticality of the elements there. I think we're running out of time, so I'll skip through that one. Again, I put this in just to open up the conversation about different ways that people practice architecture and how you, as students, you're at the beginning of your investigations, how you might think of your paths. This was a book that we published through the AIA that had a series of articles based on a panel, a year-long series of panels that looked at different ways architects can engage in the practice as artists, as policymakers, as narrators, as involved with policy or advocacy, as urban planners. And so it's really up to you to see which path you want to take. In my case, unfortunately for me, I've taken on all of it. I like to do a lot of different things, and I go back and forth between scales and approaches. And then finally here, going back to, as Henry mentioned earlier, women in the field, diversity at large, but also women in the field of architecture, and specifically in larger firms as a particularly interesting angle. And this was a panel that's an annual panel now. It was started 10 years ago. I initiated 10 years ago with my committee at the AIA, and we've had over 40 really outstanding women in the field of architecture contribute their work, and in very open discussions along various topics. Every year is a slightly different topic. And the one commonality is that came out of all these conversations is that there isn't one way of practicing, that it's really up to you, your interests, your paths, your passion, how you take it and how much you take in. Whether it's a very specific notion that you see of architecture, a narrower path, which is, deep and specific, or very broad. And this has been really a great way of engaging with people outside the firm, but we've also brought the conversation inside, which is KPF Plus, and it's our Women in Architecture at KPF group. We meet regularly amongst all the offices worldwide and share our thinking about what it means to and how one can advance in the field of architecture as a woman, and also just as a minority group member in general. And so I'm going to just end with this, and thank you for your time and your focus. And happy to take any thoughts or questions you might have.
Yes, I'll be happy to walk and hand out the microphone if there are questions. Kate, you can.
Thanks for your presentation. You talked several times about biophilic design, and I wonder if you could say a little bit about that in terms of is it about visual mimicry of nature? Is it about somehow capturing the logic of biology in architecture? How do you relate it to sustainability, but also the human interest in, right, and a commitment to nature?
Yeah, absolutely. That would have been a whole other talk, so I refrained myself. But I'm very invested in the intersection of neuroscience and architecture, and I'm involved in some research and conversations around that. And so, from my point of view, but that's not the case for, obviously, and everybody that's involved in biophilic design or biomimicry. From my point of view, where the realm that I'm working in, it's more about the human response to natural elements. So that can be direct, connection to nature, meaning access to plant material, access to light, to water, in direct connection with elements that are natural, all the way to the abstraction of natural elements through patterns, through patterns specifically. That's something that's quite, powerful. But also the use of natural materials and textures. That's another third way. And then there's also spatial. There are spatial parties, let's call them, that have to do with how we experience nature that can be reinterpreted in the built environment. Specifically, things like the concept you might be familiar with of prospect and refuge, where you're sitting in a place that feels very comfortable. A little bit like those little nooks that we created in the elevator shafts. You feel very protected and comfortable. You have control of your environment, but you have a vista out. You can see beyond. So there are many tropes like that have to do with the way that I employ or we work with biophilic design. So it's perhaps less about biomimicry, though there are people both in the office and in the field of architecture, of course, that will look at like how plants channel water, for example, right, to develop a skin design, the facade design of a building. And that's something that's very interesting. It's just, there's only so much one can do in a day. Yeah. Oh, yeah, no, we created that. We have an R&D group within our firm that's called KPF UI, Urban Interface, and we created this website and all the tools that are in it. And this is like a group within our firm, so we all work with them. We tap into them. We pull the members into our teams to, help us solve for one thing or another that we're working on. But they're like a really great resource, and they also do a lot of innovative research going forward.
I also wanted to hear about your career path and I guess how you got to where you are.
Well, I'll give you the short story. Maybe just like after I graduated. Is that okay? Yeah. So I went to RISD, and well, at RISD it's a very multidisciplinary approach. At RISD, you know, there are the first year we do freshman foundation, we do everything. Actually, I didn't go to RISD to do architecture. I went to RISD because I wanted to do sculpture and installation art. But my father convinced me to try it for 10 days. And that was it. If I didn't like it, I could do whatever I wanted. But I loved it. But that didn't leave my mind, you know, the idea of installation art and working with spaces that are very immersive like that is very much part of it. And I think kind of the limits or the boundaries between disciplines are very erased for me, like landscape, interiors, exterior, installation, furniture, art, like it's very integrated lighting. So I tend to approach it in a very multidisciplinary way in that sense. I started off my career working at Alvaro Sisa's office in Portugal. I was incredibly lucky to have that experience. So I was there for 2 years and then came to New York and worked for Todd William and Billy Tsen also for 2 years. Worked for Toshiko Mori for a year, and those were all very small firms at the time. Alvaro Sisa's was 16 people, Todd and Billy's the same, Toshiko's was like 5 people. And at one point, I thought I might try, you know, a bigger firm and see what it was like. And I was also very interested in the global and the global aspect of the firm and the like all the typologies that we tend to work in and the fact that we work at various scales. So it's like in one day you'll be working on a master plan and then figuring out a railing detail, you know, for the interior of a space. So that was very interesting for me, very intriguing. And but I didn't think I was going to stay 22 years at KPF. I thought again it was just going to be, you know, let's try it for 2 years, see how it is. But here I am. So. Thank you.
Quick question. When you mentioned you guys work at different scales, you also throughout the different projects you worked on focus all on sustainability, and you have a multidisciplinary approach. But out of curiosity, what are some of the core values and pillars that APF has that really inform each project that you do? Like depending, like doesn't matter what the scale is. What are some of those core values?
Yeah, that's a great question to ask. Well, first and foremost, I think we're really focused on, we're a very human-centric practice. We're focused on the experience of people in the spaces. As you mentioned, you know, sustainability is, again, top on the list. That's kind of part of the dough, like that's how we think now. Density and urban density in particular are topics that we're very interested in and we do really well, meaning like how do you take a dense environment in a city and create a place that it both knits into the fabric but also has like a very particular sense of place and is a I'm going to call it a landmark, but that term is overused. It's kind of more like a place that people associate with their experience of the city, right? So it becomes part of their life. So those are all elements that we, you know, are very much part of our core value. And then the fifth thing is more about, I guess you would say, like the process in which we design. We're very collaborative, team-oriented. We listen to our clients and understand what their goals are. We listen to and observe the contexts, and we work in teams a lot. So of course there's like a leader to each team in terms of the design vision, but it is very much like every person around the table counts, you know, in terms of their contribution. I've probably forgotten a few, but these are like really core values that I think across the board, everybody at KPF would say, yes, this is, regardless of what style we work in or what, you know, what the building looks like. Again, there's like, we have maybe, I think 11 design principles. So there's quite a range in terms of the language that people employ to resolve problems or to solve proposed design solutions in particular contexts, but these are the backbones of all projects. Yeah. Oh, like hundreds, yeah. Okay.
Any other comments, questions? There, go.
Hi, when you're going to approach a project and you say so many cultural and national elements, how do you filter full information to pick the ones that are maybe on your narrative or the narrative to create? How's the process?
That's a really good question. So this may not be the answer for everybody at KPF, but for me, I work in a very instinctive manner. So there's always one thing that like will pop into my mind after I've listened and walked through the site, or you know, done some research, like there's and understood what the problem is. There's usually something that like comes up, and in that first iteration, like the sketch, the idea, it tends to stick. I found that even though we might depart from it and go like 180 degrees several months later, we come back to that. So now I learned, and now I learned my lesson, and so I keep that notes. I keep those notes, the first sketch, the first kind of instinctual response, I keep it, and I date it. So I know that it's going to be somewhere around there. It doesn't mean that there's always one narrative, you know, only one narrative to every story, and certainly like I wouldn't want the work to fall into being like a one-liner kind of work, but it's helpful to have, you know, something that's like a hook that allows people to enter the project and then start to discover other aspects of it, maybe other narratives that are secondary narratives, maybe things that are not narratives at all, just kind of spatial experience. But I found that it's helpful to just have at least one point of entry so people can say, okay, yeah, I get that one, now let's find out more, let's, you know. Yeah, I think I would say really be very observant of like your day-to-day experiences. You know, when you're walking from home to here, when you visit new cities, like take note of what is interesting to you, what's attractive to you, what you know you notice. And try to distill that as you go, because those memories have everything to do with who you're going to become as an architect. Those things that you noticed earlier on and that you know are in your mind, and I think those will be the ways that you can contribute personally to the field best. It's like, that's like your path, your drive. And in that, if sustainability and well-being are top on your list of, things that you think about, then you'll find your own response to that, like how you contribute to improving well-being or sustainability. But it does come, I don't think there's a recipe. That's why I'm saying, like, be very observant and careful. Note down carefully, like, your response to places you feel good in, right? Like, if you're talking about well-being, like, oh, I really like sitting in that part of the library. Why? And start to, like, draw what you see around you, make notes. Oh, maybe it's because the light's coming in from here, and there's, like, certain elements, spatial elements or material elements that make you feel that way. Because little by little, you have a whole catalog of experiences, and you know exactly how you felt in each one of these, right? So if we're talking about well-being, all of these things, this is like a personal well-being, but then there's also like social, collective, community building well-being. There's economic well-being that comes from all those things. When people are in a space where they can communicate, they can make a good business deal, they can learn well, they can, advance in life. So, yeah.
Talk more about KPF UI. Has it changed your workflow a lot in your firm? And what was it like before that came out?
Yeah, it has. It's improved the workflow tremendously. I think KPF UI is probably like almost 10 years old or so, something like that. Maybe a little less. But what it's done is that it's streamlined our workflow, where we can very quickly analyze a huge range of possibilities, or at least if people don't want to go through that more exhaustive path, and maybe a designer has an idea about what they want, how they want to shape from the beginning, they know exactly what they're after, then this can either validate or negate, right? Like this initial concept. And so it's helpful in the sense, it has really changed our way of working, in that now there is a way of quantifying what might otherwise just be, someone's instinct, usually good, but let's say someone's instinct about, a design response. Now there's a way of like coming back to a client and saying, here's what the vision is, and there is backup for it. This is why it works really well. This is why this is the best orientation. We have a little bit more substantial backup, I would say. So it works on both ends, like justifying and cementing a design, but also on the front, arriving at the best possible massing, orientation, etc. Circulation. We do a lot with it. It's not only massing. It's like when you go on the website, there are a lot of different scripts at various scales: urban scale, building scale, interiors even.
Right. Yeah, this is the last one. Okay, so we can go to school to the.
If it's landmarked, those are dictated. So they will tell you, there's like, you have to go through landmarks approvals. So any kind of intervention you make has to be approved by landmarks. And generally, they're quite prescriptive, like that elevator lobby. We had to keep the wainscoting, we had to keep the floor, we had to keep the frames, but not the shafts, right? So we just look for the loopholes. and tried to do something where it brought life back to it, right? It became something that people felt engaged with. But generally speaking, with landmark buildings, yeah, it's quite prescriptive which elements need to be kept. Okay,
Right.
great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.